Today I'm going to tell you about a strategy that you might find useful for summarizing difficult material, like scholarly journal articles, for example, or other studies that you might be interested in including in your paper. Let's get started. So, just some background. According to the OWL at Purdue, summarizing involves putting the main ideas of a work into your own words and including only the main points. But remember that you're still going to need to cite the material that you are summarizing because it is not your original ideas. And so anytime you take ideas from another source, even if they are not word for word from that source. So even if you've paraphrased and this is not a direct quote, you'll still need to cite your source appropriately. You might choose to include a summary in your essay for a couple of reasons. Number one, including a summary of an opposing viewpoint or just a viewpoint that someone has had in the past that you want to agree with can give your essay additional purpose. So remember, we've talked a lot about summarizing a quote-unquote they say moment or summarizing perspectives of those with whom you disagree as a great way of adding purpose to your essay. And in your common knowledge essay, this can be especially effective early on in the essay. Summaries can also be very useful in supporting your argument and also expanding and deepening your claims. So you might find that summarizing a research study or a few research studies throughout your paper helps you convey the heft of the research that you've done. So there are many ways to write summaries, and there's no right or wrong way to write a summary that works every time. But when you're thinking about writing a summary, you want to make sure that you're staying in control of your sources and using them in a way that both convinces your audience that you did quality research and also convinces your audience that you understand what you read. And so I have a strategy that I believe is relatively effective in helping you achieve both of these goals. The strategy is called somebody wanted but so. So somebody wanted but so begins with the somebody. So you first tell us who did the research and you give us enough information so that we understand why this person is a credible source. So using Amy Standen, who was the author of the nail-biting article we read for Library Day, I begin my summary, Amy Standen, a science and environmental reporter for NPR, and that's my somebody. Now, the way that I know, by the way, that she's a science and environmental reporter and not just a straight-up reporter is because I Googled her name. So it took about 5 seconds, but I was able to give her a little bit of extra credibility there. So for me, that was worth the 5 seconds that it took me. Okay, the next step is wanted. So here you tell me what it was that they wanted to do or find out. What was the intention of either the article or the research study. So here you'll notice that I've added on to my somebody. Amy Standen, a science and environmental reporter for NPR, had been a nail biter for most of her life. Recently she noticed her young daughter was beginning to bite her nails as well. The new edition of the DSM, due out next year, classifies nail biting as potentially linked to OCD. So she wondered, how serious is nail biting anyway? So that's her wanted. And then there's but. Now, you won't always have a but. And in this case, I actually don't think that there's a good example of a but. But the but stands for anything that stands in between the author or the researcher and their findings. So it could be something that makes the question particularly difficult to answer, or it could be a conflicting idea that the author, him or herself, is responding to. And you won't always have this, so if you don't have anything, just don't include it. So here I didn't feel like I had anything that was worth including, so I didn't add anything. In a minute, I'm going to show you an example of a strong summary that does have a but, so you can at least see what it looks like. But this one, I didn't include one. And then the final step in the strong summary process is the so. So now you actually give me the conclusion. What does the author actually believe or assert, or what does the study conclude? And it's very typical to use exact quotations here, but if you do that, be sure to integrate the quote effectively. So adding on my so to the somebody wanted, I get this complete summary. Amy Standen, a science and environmental reporter for NPR, had been a nail biter for most of her life. Recently, she noticed her young daughter was beginning to bite her nails as well. The new edition of the DSM, due out next year, classifies nail biting as potentially linked to OCD. So, she wondered, how serious is nail biting anyway? Standen spoke to several experts, including psychiatrists and neuroscientists, and ultimately determined that most nail biting is not life-threatening. On the scale of human failings, it barely lifts the needle. Standen decides that her daughter will ultimately have to make the decision to stop biting her nails, if and when she's ready. So that's my complete summary. And here's another example of a strong summary using the SWBS approach. As New York Times journalist and 3 times Pulitzer Prize winner Max Miller notes, there's my somebody, Starbucks is now the leading coffee franchise in the US. But, he asks, why? What makes Starbucks so popular? That's the wanted. Some have suggested that Starbucks' popularity is simply a product of an increased American appetite for a caffeine fix. But Miller argues it's actually much more complicated than that. That's the but. So that's the contention that Miller is responding against. Miller insists that the rise of Starbucks is an indication of America's desire to indulge. In other words, a latte won't break the bank, but it's a luxury compared to regular Joe. And that's the so that's what he actually concludes. So that's the strong summaries strategy, the SWBS strategy. Again, it's not the only way to write a strong summary, and it's only a framework, and it's a flexible framework, so you can kind of innovate within it. But I know that for some people, it can be difficult to know what exactly to include and how much information to include in a summary. And so I found that for some people this can be useful in deciding how and what to include and making sure that you've included the key points so that your audience understands the research study or the article that you're summarizing. And this works particularly well for scholarly articles because scholarly articles have so much information in them that it can be particularly hard to parse and decide what from that scholarly article you might want to include in a summary in your paper. But I believe this strategy can be effective in helping you do that effectively. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions.